Hello, dear friend. How are you doing today? Long time no talk. I had my previous video. I had talked about Friedrich Nietzsche and how I thought that his influence was the most detrimental to society, and I continue to believe that. Somebody sent me a link. I really appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. To a video by Jordan Peterson, and he fanboyed all over Friedrich Nietzsche and said that he was brilliantly arrogant. You know, So, mind you, Jordan Peterson fanboyed over Richard Dawkins. So, there you go. It's not saying anything. Friedrich Nietzsche was an extremely evil man, and I'm determined to. I have a plan. He wrote that book. Thus spoke Zarathustra. I'm going to write a parallel version of that book, and I'm not going to call it that. Obviously, I'm going to call it, thus spoke the the Alpha and the Omega, or something along those lines. And I'm going to tear it apart piece by piece. And even though it's written in a allegorical fiction format, I'll find a way to tear that down over time, should the Lord give me strength to do so. That is my goal. Today's video, I want to talk about power in the Christian church. Is there power in the Christian church in Canada today? So what I did last Sunday was I tried to get a little bit of a pulse on different churches across the country. So I looked up the largest evangelical church in Canada. Apparently, the largest is a church in Calgary. So I watched the sermon for that congregation. But our double speed. Thank God for double speed. The pastor is a doctor. That should have been a tip-off. So he's got a PhD in something. And as you'd expect, totally boring, unengaging, just wah, 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 wah. So nothing going on in that church, right? He used a lot of scripture, which is something interesting I'll talk about in a second. And, moderately helpful, I guess you could say, to some degree, but nothing consequential. Next, I checked out a large Pentecostal church in Ottawa, the largest that I know of. I don't know if it's the largest, but it's a large one. And check that one out. I watched that. So that was a huge amount of scripture being used in that particular sermon. And this is something that I noticed a difference between churches that seem to be lower on the power scale or the consequence scale seem to use a lot less scripture. I mean, the largest evangelical church that I found in the KW region, I think the gentleman preaching used a half of one verse, right? He used a half of one verse. And then he had a prop that he used for the rest of the sermon, which was a poo emoji, if you can believe that. It was a pillow in the shape of, well, yeah, I'm going to reveal by saying that which church it is, but it's not hard to figure out. And he used like a snippet of scripture for his basis. And that sermon had absolutely no power, as they say. Another church I actually listened to firsthand was a tiny sliver, like 4 or 5 verses of scripture, and again, it was horrible. It ended up complimenting an enemy of humanity that I recognized immediately, and that was very, very disturbing, very depressing. So I went through 1, 2, 3, 4. Was there a fifth one? Anyway, I listened to 4 sermons on Sunday, and they were from the previous week. A couple of them were from Mother's Day, and a couple of them were current. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in the details, but what I was noticing was that the level of engagement, the level of power, the level of influence that you could feel coming out of the message was in proportion to the amount of scripture that was used. Now, you have to give it to the Pentecostal church that used the most scripture. Eventually fell into manipulation of his audience, which was easy to see. he would say, stand on your head, spin around, and do this and do that, because he'd work himself into such a fervor. And let me be clear that I believe in the manifestation of the fruits of the Spirit, and they could be a wonderful thing, and on and on. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But in this instance, the gentleman that was preaching was obviously using it to his advantage, to manipulate his audience, to produce essentially a dog and pony show, which I'm suspecting would have no lasting consequence whatsoever, because it was simply for the for the presentation he was doing at the time, as if it was a parlor show or a Las Vegas, sleight of hand, one of those things where, you hypnotize the people and they start barking like cats and dogs and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. But again, he did use a lot of scripture. So I was just trying to get my head around this idea of whether the church has power in Canada or not. Now, statistics, this is depending on statistics from the Canadian government, so I don't know how reliable it is, but it tells us that around 2019, 2020, the average number of Christian adherents in Canada was about 53% of the population. And since that time, 2020, 21, 22, that has dropped down to below 50%. So in other words, the number of people who claim to be Christian in Canada is dropping. And apparently globally, the fastest growing religion is Islam, but that is what it is. And so if you look strictly at that statistic, now, I'd have to look at a broader range of statistics to get a feel. But I think it's probably pretty close to being accurate that the current state of the Christian church is maintaining its infrastructures, it's maintaining its franchises of locations, but it's not having any influence in increasing the desire or influence or the number of adherents to Christianity on a whole, for the whole country. And I was trying to think, why is that? What's going on here? Does the church have power? Does it not have power? And what it is that the church essentially is collecting income to support their own expenses. So they're collecting money and they spend it on themselves, and they spend it on their staff. They give a small pittance as a missionary work of some kind, feeding the orphans and widows, and perhaps evangelizing in faraway places, I suppose. But I would suspect that amount would be a small amount. Prove me wrong. I'd be happy to hear any statistics you have on that. And so there is a link I'd like to provide to you called opensecrets.org, which is the summarizes. I don't know how accurate their data is, but again, you eventually got to trust people, what they're researching sometimes, about who has the power, the amount of lobbying that is taking place. Now, the amount of lobbying that the Christian church does in North America is inconsequential. It's in the five figures. They're maybe giving $10,000 or $50,000 or maybe as high as $100,000 through a consultant to try and perhaps get better zoning on some property that they own. Pardon me. I'm mostly looking at Evangelical Church in Canada. The Catholic Church in Canada has no power. They'll be selling off their land and paying off lawsuits for the next 100 years due to clerical abuse and what have you. So there's no political influence from the Catholic Church in Canada. And of course, anything to do with the nominal faiths, the United Church or Episcopalian or who knows what, they don't amount to anything either. So power is determined by the amount of financial influence on the government, because the government is making the policy, and that policy is influenced by the people that are buying that influence, right? They're buying that power. And this is what you can see in the list of lobbyists in North America. What's the number one? The number one lobbyist in North America? Well, of course, it's not hard to guess, right? It's the pharmaceutical industry. And you can see the names of all the regular players. I'll put a link to that so that you can see that. The pharmaceutical industry has the power in terms of political power. And you say, well, that's not the power of God's church. You know, the power of God's church is the Spirit of God. And yes, I know, but bear with me for a second here. You look through history, and what changes the state of a country? What caused the biggest dramatic shift you say, well, 400 A.D., Constantinople, the conversion of essentially the Roman Empire to Catholicism. When you have political power allied with the spiritual power, and you say, oh, a separation of church and state has to be kept separate. Not all religions believe that. And the ones that don't believe that support, lobby, gain political power, and then that political power becomes religious power, if you want to call it that. So, there's a scripture in Romans, I think Paul is saying, I'm going to come there and see who's got the power, not just the arrogant speaking, but the actual power that exists there. And you can see that today, right? Anytime a preacher of any consequence gains a following, they immediately give themselves over to licentiousness. They give themselves over to greed. And they use the scriptures concerning tithes and offerings to their advantage. When originally the tithe was a great idea by God on how to bless the Israelites, say, gather together your stuff and then you can borrow from it. It was a banking co-op was the tithe administered by the Levites. You could borrow from it at a flat 20% interest rate. You'd pay back 1/5. You borrow 100 grand, you pay back 120 grand. Today you borrow 100 grand on a mortgage. By the end of the mortgage, you paid off 200 or more. So this flat rate, 20% interest rate, would have made any nation fabulously wealthy in terms of economic development if they had followed it. But of course, the Christians weren't that smart, and instead they used those scriptures to fleece the sheep for their own financial gain, to line their own pockets, to justify all kinds of stuff, and they are deceptively wicked in how they use the scriptures to their advantage. And if you want to see details on that, I ask you to follow John Elving. He is excellent on keeping tabs on the state of the Christian church in Canada and through North America and elsewhere. So he's on the ball. That is a gentleman that has genuine power, not power based on ego, as the apostle said, right? He said the power is not a genuine power he was talking about. And there's other times when our teacher talked about power, when they were trying to say, oh, what happens in heaven, when a guy marries a brother and the guy dies, and then his brother marries his wife, and then he dies, and another mother. And the response from the teacher was, you don't understand the scriptures, nor the power of God. So the two kind of have he separated them for a reason, right? He said, you don't understand the scriptures, and you don't understand the power of God. The power of God is beyond what we can imagine. It is so far beyond. And another time he used when he was facing the Gethsemane and the end, and the soldiers coming for him, and he said, at this time, the power of darkness is given to you in this hour. So there is a power, a darkness that has temporary power, and we are seeing that today. We are seeing this temporary power of darkness that is trying to take complete control of the global population and dictate their policy on the global population through the pharmaceutical industry, the World Health Organization, having the final say in every individual country, of what the people have to do according to medical instruction that they dictate. I'm not going to go into detail because you know exactly what I'm talking about, and this is what they want to do. They figure it's for the benefit of the planet, the benefit of humanity, and on and on and on. They have their reasons why they want to do this, and so on and so forth. And so we're seeing this um, evolving of efforts in that direction. Is it all evil? I'm sure a lot of it is sincere helping, trying to help the best for humanity. I bet a lot of it is probably as much as 1 or 2% of the intention. Um, and so you know you got to look at that and be aware of what's happening. And so how many Christian churches or how many Christians in general have power in Canada? I know that there are currently 2 active Christians in Canada, um, and I don't know of any others. The rest are dead. Now, when I say dead, I don't. I'm being hyperbolic because Christians are, as I said, they're maintaining the status quo. They're having prayer meetings. They're praying for people who are sick, and they're praying that they can make it through life. They're praying that they can survive and exist with dignity. But we're told faith without works is dead, and so there is no works. The works are the hidden grunt work, and that's valuable and important. I get that. But the 2 individuals that I'm talking about, you probably recognize them, right? One is uh, Josh Alexander. He's a high school student, and he is fighting for his particular faith. And the other one is a guy by the name of Billboard Chris. He's fighting for his particular faith. I don't know what denominations they're representing or how severe their ideology is in terms of what they believe and what they don't believe. But I know that foundationally, both of them are uh, foundationally Christian adherents of one form or another. And so they are active. They are active. They are exercising their power as Christians, and the rest are sleeping, regurgitating, and navel gazing amongst themselves to maintain their franchises, maintain their location, and maintain their infrastructure, and they have no political power. And again, of course, we have to differentiate between what types of power we are talking about. We're talking about the power of God, or we're talking about the power of the Spirit. We're talking about political power, and a lot of what I'm talking about here is kind of floating in between these different definitions while using the same word. So forgive me if some of it strikes you as, oh no, that's not right, or that. I understand that. It's fine. It's okay. But this is what I'm trying to figure out, and I haven't figured it out yet. But I thought if I brought it up and mentioned it in a video, it might tweak your interest. And so I'll include those links, opensecrets.org, to let you know who is influencing policy, and John Elving's website, because he is a man of faith that is genuine and sincere. He is not someone that just boasts ego and arrogance to get money out of people so that he can buy expensive jewelry and cars and airplanes or whatever that these preachers want to do when they get themselves in that position. Unfortunately, they don't make any efforts to influence public policy one iota. They don't give a penny to the government to try and influence policy. They spend it on themselves. They spend it on their own selfish desires and consumption, and their cronies, their friends, their in-laws and outlaws who are on their own staff, and so on and so forth. So we should keep aware. And of course, what is the final message is to pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out workers like these 2 gentlemen that I mentioned. If we had even 1,000 people like that, they could put to flight any opposition, whatever the topic was, as long as, of course, you want to have it biblical. You don't want to have it based on hatred or based on bigotry or based on something that is in error. If they're in error, and no one's going to be perfect, they might have some parts of their message that is wrong. I don't know. I haven't really looked into exact detail of what either of them, but as far as power, they certainly are exercising faith in action, so to speak. And so we have to pray the Lord of the harvest that He would raise up people that are willing to speak out and influence public policy. There's only two ways to influence public policy. That's with dollars and with concerted, unified voices. And those concerted, unified voices have to have faith, have to have strength, have to have 100% belief in what it is that they're standing up for. And so the world uses the easy way, which is the influence of dollars, right? So let's continue to persevere and to pray every day. Sorry I went over time. God bless you. I love you very much. I hope you're doing great. And I'm sorry to waste so much time. I hope you're able to double speed this video if you are interested in the topic, and that you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the great weather. God bless you very much. I hope to talk to you again soon, okay? Be good. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Get out, get some fresh air. Bye-bye.